everyone. My name is Renee Vara, and I'd like to welcome you to the first session of Art Salon here at the Basel Convention Center. And today we are gathering a group of amazing speakers for you to quickly discuss a panel that is hosted by the Appraisers Association of America, which is one of the largest certified organizations of certified appraisers in America. So we are all here to talk about art market dynamics, and we're going to do it in a very casual way because everybody's so brilliant on the panel. I'm going to quickly introduce everyone and refer you to the handout. The bios are so interesting and illustrative that we have decided to have you read them. So first we'd like to welcome Judd Tully to my right, who is editor-at-large for Art and Auction. Lindsay Pollock, who is a Bloomberg reporter and blogger extraordinaire. Suzanne Gyorgy, who's the head of Citibank Art Advisory. And Charles Stainback, who is the curator of the Norton Museum of Art. After we've decided that we're going to pose a question to each one of the panelists and allow everyone to kind of give their opinions very freely. And after the 30 minutes, we will take questions, so please hold them to the end. But we love your thoughts and questions afterward. So my first question, and I kind of feel like a talk show host, so I'm sorry, I'm not used to like handling this thing, is actually directed to Suzanne. Oops, there's my books. Right now, there's been a lot of speculation and conversation about who the collectors are in the art market. Every day we hear news of different global economies collapsing. First it was Russia, and we saw the loss of the kind of Russian high-end collector. Now it's recently Dubai. Everybody's wondering if we're going to see Dubai collectors. So I'm wondering kind of what your perspective is on who is the collector at the moment, and also how you feel collectors think about using leverage as a way to kind of hedge against inflation.
That's a very full question. For those that, we at Citigroup, we advise clients globally on buying art and building art collections, so we get to see a nice cut of the market. And what we'd seen with our clients is after the crash in last November, everyone became very, very quiet. And they were still interested, they still wanted to know what was going on, but people were really, in the clients we're working with, were really not buying. And through the summer, we started to see a lot of very large private transactions, but not a lot of activity at auction. And the private transactions were primarily, what we were seeing was primarily in the US and a little bit in Europe. But that's our cut of the market that we're seeing. And then August was the slowest August I can remember. And then suddenly in September, everyone became interested. And our clients in the Middle East were interested, our clients in Asia were, in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe again, and then in the United States. So, I really feel that everyone's kind of woken up, and I think some because so much was going on privately, a lot never really stopped. It felt like it stopped because public records, what's going on at auction, and that, wasn't that robust. As for art and leverage, I started my career in a museum, and when you're in a museum, you don't really think about value, and you certainly don't think about leverage. So when I started at Citigroup, it was a real eye-opener to me that up and down Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, all over the globe, people are using their art as collateral, and it's often to invest in other things. And then the other thing we're seeing recently is I think some people are more interested in buying art. Not that they're not passionate collectors, because they are, but they certainly have a mind that it's a hedge against inflation right now, and are looking to put their money in something tangible.
Judd, what do you think as someone who travels globally, attends all the auctions, and is really at kind of the nexus of where those transactions are happening consistently? What do you think who the collector is at this moment?
Well, I seriously don't have a clue of who, the real collectors are. I've been told over and over by different people in the art market world that the names, like when some huge transaction takes place, say the $201 bills that sold at Sotheby's last month in New York, the Andy Warhol painting, sold for like 43 point something million dollars. And there was speculation, and they always named, us journalists, always named the same 3 or 4 suspects. It's Niarchos, it's Pinchuk, it's the hedge fund guy from Connecticut, Steve Cohen. I mean, it's sort of, and people have pointed out to me that there are people, collectors, that are at that level, but are literally completely under the radar and do not want or allow their names to be mentioned. And so you get into this kind of mystery of, yes, it's a Russian or it's from a former Soviet republic, one of those countries, because the other side of this question about who are these people is that even when there's a downturn, there are people that are making loads of money at that downturn because they've placed a bet that that was going to happen. So I think there is always, a lot of liquidity around. But it's a bigger group of people than the names that you hear and read about in the press. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Lindsay, your thoughts?
That was very good, Judd. No, I thought it was really interesting. I was in Abu Dhabi a couple weeks ago for the Abu Dhabi Art Fair, which is a fairly new fair, and I'd never been to the Middle East, and somebody grabbed me and said, I read that Forbes list of billionaires, and I just laugh. I know 30 guys here who should be on that list, but they're under the radar. So, there are a lot of people out there. We have no idea really who they are. I always tend to think the whole universe of art collecting is pretty small at the end of the day. I think the number's got to be around 5,000 people who are seriously collecting globally. That's sort of my guess. But as to your question about who the collectors are, I think it's just a very broad swath of people, in China, in Taiwan, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, all over the world. So it's hard for us to really.
And Charles, what do you think, kind of being in a Florida museum, who your collectors, who your board of directors are? Do you think recently the market volatility has affected participation for different kind of global representative areas?
Well, interestingly, I'm in West Palm Beach, so what was happening with Madoff and other people like that was talked about, but I never really saw any evidence of it. People were pulling back, but they weren't selling off that I knew of. But like Judd and you were saying, a lot of times I don't know what they're up to. If I do go over to dinner, I'll see a new painting or I'll see a new room full of paintings, but they're not calling me, telling me what they're doing. They might ask my advice at some point, but they really are out there doing what they want to do, and they're very passionate about what they're doing. But again, I'm not knowing everything. What I focus on is what I focus on, and I focus on the things that I want to do, and I try and get those people that are collectors in Palm Beach to support what I want to do.
I think one of the interesting aspects of this small world, where especially at an art fair like this, where literally, you could be rubbing shoulders. Well, the aisles are wider now, so maybe you wouldn't be, but someone can come up to a gallery and say, I'm interested in such and such, and the gallerist doesn't know this person from Adam sometimes, or they don't recognize the art advisor they're with if they have one. And there are literally situations where dealers have made huge mistakes by judging what someone's wearing and blows them off, and then they find out later this is, Joe Billionaire from somewhere. And the other problem with this is that being acutely aware of that, sometimes dealers sell works to individuals who then don't follow through and pay. They just change their mind and don't pay. They don't get the artwork, but they sort of take it out of circulation. So it's very difficult in this sort of, like, it's one thing if, Roman Abramovich walks down at Frieze or one of the big fairs, and there are, shutterbugs going after him. But it's quite complicated, I think.
Which leads me to the next question, because I feel the kind of presence of art fairs is really relatively, the power of art fairs in the art market in the last decade has changed significantly. So, and it's changed the landscape of the marketplace for this very reason of this kind of accessibility and people being able to be under the radar and come here and collect. But Lindsay, I was wondering, you've been in the field for so long and reporting for so long on art market dynamics, how you feel that the last year has either been similar or different from the pullback of the market in the 1990s.
Well, I've been covering the market not since I guess since around 2000, but I actually did work at an auction house with some people in the room here in the 1990s, so I can talk about that a little bit. What we've seen in terms of the pullback this year, both at fairs and obviously at auction, I think just did reflect really a mirror of what was going on in the financial markets. It was tracked so closely, the brunt of the financial crunch, and people really pulling back on their appetite for buying, and not surprisingly, of course. Obviously there have been other financial crunches. We could even look back at the Depression in the 30s, and even Mrs. Abby Rockefeller, who was the wealthiest woman in the country, found it distasteful to buy art while people were on the breadlines. So it's really a perception thing a lot of the time, even if people may have the wealth. From what I understand, in the 90s, when it was very much related to Japanese speculation in the market, had pumped up prices in 89 and 90, and you had Van Gogh paintings selling for astronomical amounts. That all plummeted really swiftly when the Japanese market crumbled, when their own economy crumbled. Now, what we saw last November, auctions really did weaken. The market clearly softened, prices dropped, but then even starting last June, we noticed at Art Basel in Switzerland a bit of a recovery. And then this fall's auctions, while they were significantly smaller than they had been by huge proportion, the auction houses quickly reduced their sizes to the market now.
Suzanne, do you want to comment?
Well, I think the other thing that happened, to Lindsay's point, is that people didn't want to be seen bidding publicly at auctions for things because they didn't want to be flaunting the fact that they still had money or whatever. And that's why so much of the market went so private. And so while people were reporting a very depressed market, things were, and we've talked to people in the auction house, and they were saying, like last spring, nothing's selling for over 15 million, nothing's selling for, over 10 million, in that range. We were seeing private transactions at, 25 million, 35 million, and it was just done very, very quietly.
Joe, do you want to comment or ask a question from that one?
You've got a question?
Did you have a question?
Well, I think Judd's point was that we reporters, we don't know what goes on privately. It's really frustrating because we only can go by mostly auction results. And so we do present a distorted view of the marketplace because we're relying mostly on public information, and private information that Suzanne might be able to share with us would help to give us a fuller picture.
I think even here, as you walk through, curators and collectors, they may have been meetings and be taken into the back room of a booth, and there's kind of transactions happening there and people looking at works that have been saved for them, and maybe you can talk about kind of the curator's role in that element, Charles.
Well, for me, I have certain things that I'm interested in and things that I want to add to the collection. But what I like to do is walk around with some of my key donors and try and usually I'm pretty successful in getting them excited about the things that I'm excited about and getting them excited about things that I think will be important to add to the collection. But that's, in the business, that's a long-term cultivation thing. That's not something you do at one art fair, and it's years or months of working with someone. But again, eventually you get to a point where they not write a blank check, but they will help you. A museum like the Norton, we have acquisitions funds, and our endowment has shrunk a little bit this past year, but that no way does that come close to buying or use the money from that to buy what we want to buy. It's too small.
I think one of the things that it's interesting to see here, I've noticed that there are a number of people from the auction houses that have come down to Miami to, check it out, to go around, in both contemporary art and also impressionists, specialists. And I think that also indicates not only they're trying to find out where the galleries are, where the price points are, but to see what kind of activity there is, and also because of this sort of, I don't know if you call it reluctance, not really fear, of putting really high-end property on the auction block right now. I mean, that could just change again quickly. But as a result, the auction houses are putting more energy into private sales, and they're acting as private dealers. They are dealers. I mean, they're doing everything. And just as the art fairs, I think, began initially, at least some of the fairs, as a way to counter all of the pizzazz the auctions were doing and having this sort of event-driven, pull the trigger now or hold your peace. It's interesting to see this in this kind of changing environment.
Which leads me to my next question. Judd, this is for you. How important do you think art fairs are in, a kind of moment of pullback, if we were to say, in the art market? And do you think their roles have recently changed with the current economic climate?
Well, personally, it's a lot harder to cover an art fair when there aren't, 300 transactions in the first 15 minutes, where if you're reporting on it, you can walk into a booth and somebody can just tell you perhaps what's been sold. And I think it's depressing. I mean, I remember last year going to some of the fairs, and usually where the dealers, not just, the name dealer and then the staff, the director, usually they're on their toes. They're watching who's coming in the aisle. And you'd walk by and there'd be like a huddle of 5 people going like this with their Blackberries and drinking coffee, and nothing was happening. So I think it's very different. And art fairs are not meant to be, they don't look very pretty in the recession, because it's hard to keep up that sort of guise of, everything is great. And also, I think, frankly, there's a lot of resistance, I think, still on the part of many dealers in terms of making prices more realistic to where the market is. And, I mean, there's a lot more negotiation now, but I think just the price tags you see, I think, in a lot of stands, or when you hear about, are quite toppy.
But Judd, wouldn't you agree that a lot of what's been happening in the art fairs is that the price has been held back, but also the good works have been held back, like you said. So the quality of some of the fairs. I mean, I was at Frieze last October. I was at the Art Forum in Berlin, and 2 years ago when I was at Art Forum Berlin, I thought it was really wonderful. And 2 months ago, whenever I was there, it was dreadful. And I think a lot of the dealers just aren't going to the fairs, and a lot of dealers definitely aren't bringing the good work.
Well, it's very expensive. It costs, to move the art, to move the staff, to get the artist. It's a really heavy lifting operation. So it makes sense that people would drop out, and because they're afraid they're not going to make their money back.
Well, I
But-
found it kind of interesting was that different dealers responded to this kind of art fair strategy. Their art fair strategy changed somewhat. And I thought, for me, the Armory of this year in New York was one of the ones where some dealers wanted to fly to something that seemed more stable, so they chose artists that seem a little bit more solidified in their careers, or they put a smattering of one work by every artist, seeing if they could kind of throw a whole bunch of stuff out there. And other artists and other dealers said, okay, we're in a moment where it's trying, we're not sure. And they really did very brave solo installations of one artist, thinking kind of, okay, so we're in a tougher time where things aren't flying off of the booth in 5 minutes. So we're going to really take this opportunity to make a statement with what our gallery is about rather than just kind of trying to capture sales. So I feel like that started a bit ago, and you can see a mixture of different strategies in terms of how dealers want to kind of approach the less kind of blustering art sales. Suzanne, do you have a
Well,
thought?
to me, it seemed like that there was a moment, after this crash, where it looked like galleries were going to go back to sort of the pure, going back to the basics of showing new artists and really exploring the art and kind of going back to the way things were maybe 20 years ago. But it feels like that corrected itself pretty quickly, and and that we're right back to, there's sort of the tried and true pieces that people are offering. But also, I think back to the point of how dealers handled this. Some dealers very quickly realized the market had adjusted and were very savvy and realized, if I lower the prices of what I've got, I'll be able to sell it. It'll give me money to go back and buy more things at lower prices. And I think those dealers have been very successful. Others really held on to some fantasy prices that probably even in the boom market they weren't attaining, and took much longer to adjust, and I think they're more hurt.
One of my questions, my personal questions is, many people don't kind of, the dealer strategy of not moving prices too quickly to readjust to this, if they were to have moved prices a year ago before this fair, and then now we're seeing a little bit more market solidity, maybe stability, if dealers were to move that quickly as the auctions were, what circumstance do you think a young artist would be in, for instance, that has a very vulnerable, fragile marketplace when they're only 28 and, showing at one of the most famous fairs in the world?
I really can't answer that because it's so complicated. Dealers make decisions for a variety of reasons, and each dealer is different. And the reason one dealer didn't lower the price is because he couldn't and didn't have to, because he was sitting on some resources that he had from the good years, and other dealers had to lower their prices because they didn't have the resources. So I think it's different for all sorts of reasons.
Well, you can see it in the auction rooms in terms of, certain artists. I don't know, one, like a poster child would be probably someone like Murakami, who at one point there was a lot of material going through and a lot of it selling, and then there have been a higher percentage of buy-ins of when the works don't sell, and when you can see a work and you can see the dealer in the aisle not raising his hand to support his artist that he's representing, you kind of wonder, like, it's sort of an indication that the price isn't right, and even if it must be even. It's telling in that way that the younger artists were the ones that got pushed up the highest and came down the fastest, but it's still, it's depends on the work that's being offered, and especially in a down market or a changing market, chances are those works won't be that good, which raises the possibility that it won't sell, and that's, it hurts the artists. The auction houses, as long as they're not guaranteeing it, they have no investment in these artists. They could care less. I mean, they want the artists to do well, but they're not invested like a gallery that's devoted 5 years of doing shows and exhibitions and paying for catalogs and paying a lot of money to build up an artist's career. It's a very different. It's not a formula, but it's a very complex because they get rammed on kind of both sides. The dealers can get hurt as more than the auction houses, I guess.
So we've touched on a couple of different dynamics in what, considered the art market. One of the ones we have been commenting on but haven't talked about explicitly is the auctions. And Lindsay, I was wondering, right now in this moment, if you feel, what you feel the role of the auction houses have played in terms of either exacerbating kind of the downturn in the market or helping it return to some stability because auction house results are verifiable, they're public, and we can look into them as kind of barometers of market stability.
Well, I think a lot of dealers actually did put a lot of blame on the auction houses for the bubble that occurred in 2005, 6, and 7. And I think what the dealers had at issue was a lot of the financing that the auction houses did. You may be familiar with the term guarantee, where a seller would go to the auction house to sell a painting or an artwork, and the auction house would actually make a promised amount. We will pay you X regardless of how the sale does. And while prices are rising, the auction houses found that to be really profitable, and sellers therefore could put things at auction and actually have no risk. And as long as prices kept rising, it almost was, I thought, a pseudo gallery, because if everything's sort of been prepaid for by the auction houses, it's not really a true open free marketplace. But that was, so the auction houses were blamed a little bit for the bubble that went on. And when everything went south last year, I think the auction houses did realize if they hold these sales twice a year, particularly the big ones in May and November in New York, and had poor results, it sets a very bad tone and a very bad tenor for the entire art market. So I think they quickly, and this is where an auction house has an advantage, they can quickly change their strategy, and they shrunk their sales drastically from having evening sales with 95 lots to having sales with 40 lots, so that they were able to present results that appeared respectable. So they didn't have reporters and people feeling like these auctions were doing terribly, because they were still able to sell a lot less. So I think the auction houses have quickly reacted. In the most recent round of sales, they certainly got results that appeared on paper respectable, but were, far off the boom results.
Suzanne, how do you feel seeing you're exposed to both the kind of public auction and you're seeing it from a private kind of transaction base? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think when the auction houses were guaranteeing things were getting real. When it hit its peak, it became very confusing because you had dealers coming in being the third-party guarantor for artists that they're representing, and it just, like, the transparency just became very murky in my mind. And and even now the new kind of guarantee they're doing where
Irrevocable bid.
Yeah. Right.
It's the new word, irrevocable bid.
Right, so the new gamble, where someone who's interested in buying the lot can come in and say, I'll buy it for $5 million. And if it doesn't, if no one else bids for it, they get it. And if someone bids higher, either they can keep bidding against the other person to try and get it, or not, and or drop out and take some of the upside. It's sort of it's like things level out and you think that you're going to go back to a true, willing buyer, willing seller kind of market, and it feels that way for just a brief period of time, and then there's like other games kind of come into it. As far as what's going on at auction and privately, I think, it's what everyone's reporting is that at auction the really, really good things are, selling well, and the estimates are low, which stimulates bidding. And I think that's helped more people get interested. And I think people are feeling more comfortable getting back into the whole auction scene and actually, being seen bidding and everything. So things are leveling out. And we're probably back to where we were in 2005, 2006, which honestly was a very, was a good market. It was a good place to be.
The last question I have, and then we're going to take some questions because I think we're running out of time, is, is this the moment of the museum in that people are not buying as quickly, they're not buying as impulsively, which means there's time for museums to look, find the right work, go through the kind of bureaucratic process of the acquisition committee. I've heard a lot of museums felt kind of left out of the buying opportunities in the past 5 years because of the flurry and the quickness of transactions. I'm wondering if now, we're going to see kind of the influx of museum acquisition committees now that prices have settled down and transactions are much slower and people have time to think about buying art rather than just impulsively buying it.
So is that directed towards me, I guess?
Yes.
The one sort of thing that I noticed very quickly, that galleries started calling me. 3 years ago, if I'd call a gallery and talk about an artist that I wanted to show in an exhibition and could they help me find something from a collector that I could borrow for this exhibition, they would help me. But now they're calling me and asking when I'm coming to New York, can we go to dinner? Because a lot of museums, we still have our acquisitions funds. We still have those endowments, and we're still buying at almost the same level we did, 5 years ago. And we also have those collector groups. So for the museums, I think it's a great time because the auction prices are down somewhat. The good work is coming forward. For the material that I look at, it's actually even better because I'm not buying blue chip, $3 million paintings. I'm buying $10,000 and $20,000 photographs, and so there's a really a great time. A year ago, I bought a beautiful Cindy Sherman from 1982 for $18,000.
Wow.
And it was at auction, and I just happened to be there, and I knew I had the funds available and did it. So they are there, and you can find those deals.
Anybody else want to comment?
Well, following that point, it's a great time for new collectors to get in the market, and there are a lot of people that moved to cash a year ago that are now in a position to start buying art. And what we're seeing is that they're very interested in learning about the art market, and I think after the bubble feel it's a great time to come in and very methodically and thoughtfully start buying art and building good collections.
Well, great. Basically, we can see in 30 minutes, the art market is not one art market. The art collector is not one art collector, and auction dynamics and the role of the dealer are very complex elements that all have to be teased through, and certainly we're at a moment where things are changing. So I guess I'm going to invite everyone, first of all, thank everyone for attending and our panelists, but I'm going to invite people to ask questions of the panelists. If you could stand up and she'll hand you.
Hi, my name is Maria Veronica Leon. I come from Ecuador, living in Paris, artist and journalist. You talk this is a new time for new collectors, this is a new time for museums. And what about the artists? In the side of artists, this is a new time also for artists. And what happened with the new artists appearing?
Great question. So her question was, we've talked about collectors, auction houses, museums, but is this a moment for the artists? And what does it mean for the artists right now? Who wants to take that?
Well, it depends on who the artist is. I mean, for some it's a great opportunity because there's less pressure about producing, or I think artists get a lot of, if they're in the market, I mean, there are lots of artists that have never, sold a single work in a gallery or an auction house. I mean, they're artists, but in terms of those active in the market, I think it can be a good time because there's probably less pressure on them to produce because there's a waiting list, because there's no waiting list. And but I think probably thinking about it in terms of, it's just like, you know, whatever you want to call it, intellectual property, or that it's, the artists are, you know, get used to a certain lifestyle because they've been selling some works, and then suddenly their gallery isn't selling out their show, or not selling half the show, and maybe not selling anything. So I think it can be, you know, hard times as well. So I don't know.
I think the depends answer is great. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm exposed to a lot of emerging art, and 3 years ago, I mean, artists were not even graduating their BA or their BFA, and they were getting solo shows at dealers. You know, just like, you know, different fairs have different kind of art, are affected differently, so are artists, and that segment of the market has really, it's really tough for them because, you know, it was a moment where a lot of young artists could get entree into the art market very quick, very young, even if they were untested. Whereas also I see a lot of people on collecting in museums looking at female artists again, because there are, you know, a lot of established, interesting female artists. The prices are very good, and some, you know, more established artists, what they call mid-career artists, people are returning to look at them again and showcase them. So whereas emerging artists are getting less opportunities, I feel like female artists and mid-career artists are getting a lot more opportunity. Charlie, I don't know.
Well, no, that's the point I was trying to get at, because there's, you know, there's the emerging artists, and I kind of think that's where her question was directed, not the established artists like Richard Artsweiger or Robert Longo. It's people that had these blips and now they're really down. And I agree. I think there was a false sense of accomplishment in a way, because they had this moment, but it was a propped up moment. I don't think it was a real moment. Some of those people, I think, will continue and have a very good career, but I think a lot of them will not.
Anyone else want to come in? Anybody? Any other questions? Please stand up.
Yes, I wonder if you could flesh out the role of the art advisor a little more. What are the characteristics that make a good art advisor, someone who follows their patrons?
Sounds like you just came up with a good panel discussion in and of itself. So she's asking, what is the role of the art advisor, and what are some of the characteristics of a good one? And I would assume in terms of choosing one. Does anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I'll take it. I think ideally a good art advisor is providing education to their client and also access to art they might not otherwise have access to. I think they're trying to focus them in on really what they're responding to, and to help develop their eye just through a lot of exposure, and it takes time. And it's, you know, with clients we work with, we may be, you know, doing the education process for quite a long time if they're a new collector. And then really making sure that they're getting the best quality for the best price, and doing all the due diligence there, and, you know, the nuts and bolts of checking condition and the provenance, and really protecting the client to making sure they're making a wise purchase, with the eye to putting together a really meaningful art collection.
I would comment that I think also art advisors vary in their strategy and their approach and what they're providing their clients as much as dealers and art fairs do. And I could say that, you know, for a young collector, education is really, really required. Sometimes they didn't have the patience to learn, listen, and look before you buy, because at the moment, I think it's returning back to more of a dialogue and an educational process, which, you know, you often get through museums and everything of that sort. But in the blistering moments of a couple years ago, many of the dealers did not have a moment to focus on education because the market was so busy and there were so many art fairs. But, you know, also other, you know, it's cultivating a passion for the collection, but also other collectors, some of them that are, you know, very, very established, very seasoned. I work with collectors that have been in the field for 20 years. They might have very different needs from an art advisor than someone who's a young collector. And some of it, as Suzanne, you were saying, some of it is making sure you're paying the right price for something. If you're buying something that's very, very high end, very blue chip, because then there might be more of an eye towards investment there. Or, maybe some of the more established collectors, we saw a lot of collectors that are collecting Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. They don't have kind of the visual database of what is interesting young art. And so maybe they would like more exposure to young artists. And certainly, Charlie, I don't know, you take collectors around all the time. What are your thoughts? Because in a way, museums are working with collectors all the time in a different capacity.
Right. Well, the collectors that I take around are photo-based and contemporary-based, so that's what we're looking at, and that's what I'm interested in. And I have to say, for the most part, the people that go around with me, they're very knowledgeable. I mean, these people are travel everywhere. They have the time. They have the resources, and sometimes they're even more knowledgeable than I am. I mean, they really are out there. So.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Nobody? All right. Well, I thank you. I thank you on behalf of the Appraisers Association of America, and I thank all the panelists.